Welcome to the Teaching Selective orientation for the ECMH setting. I wanted to touch base with you since it's been a while since you've started with your students and to review some of the Teaching Selective courses, goals and objectives, logistics, one method for providing feedback, a review of the students, the independent learning plan that the student needs to submit, and the assessments that will be needed to complete for the course. Pertaining to ECMH, the objective that pertains to your setting really is providing the students with an opportunity to provide feedback in a clinical setting. When we think about the process for feedback, the big goal, we have setting expectations, performances, and the feedback, but really what we want to do is to identify the performance gap. So that's the big part of this exercise for the fourth year student, is to provide them an authentic learning opportunity to teach in a clinical context and to identify some gaps that they can work on for improvement. The process for doing this is setting expectations, having the students perform and absorbing them, invite their own clinical reflection on how they performed, discuss an identified gap in their performance, ask them what their frame of mind is for pertaining their performance, so how well did they think they did, and then close that loop with coming to an agreement with the student with a plan on the next step, what they're going to do next. So we have this spelled out in the Teaching Selective with a checklist. The checklist has 4 components. It has a setting expectations section, a communicating effectively section, a feedback criteria area, and the knowledge application and integration. And what we're going to ask you to do is to complete this checklist when you're observing the student teach, and then sit down with them and have them bring the checklist as well, have them think about how well they did, and then have a discussion about their performance and come to some agreement on what the next steps for them are in their teaching. So that particular picture was a picture of the actual paper checklist, but so you can see it a little clearly, in the setting expectations section, one of the items is to clearly explain the process for the learning activity. So did the student do that? Did they clearly explain what the learner is expected of them? Did they explain why it's important? And did they take into consideration the learner's current knowledge level and needs? One example might be for the M4 to say to the junior learner, when we go in the room, I would like you to perform as much of the chest exam as you can, and I'm going to give you feedback on the accuracy. After the exam is over and we leave the room, I will give you feedback on your performance, and we'll have a discussion on how this experience integrates with your cardiovascular module. The sections in the communicating effectively include the body language, the gestures, if they're not using their hands too much or saying some phrase too much, or the ums. We all probably have a tendency to do that. Did they speak at an appropriate pace? Big one in here in this section is, did they engage the learner in the setting? And did they actively listen and adapt to the learner's needs while they were in the room with the patient? Pertaining to feedback, the one thing I'd like you to take away is, did they ask the learner for their own self-assessment up front? So did they say, how do you think you did? Can you tell me what you did well? Did you tell me what you didn't do so well? Did they probe for the learner's rationale? This is really important, because if we don't ask the learner how they think they did, we're not going to get at the motivators or the drivers behind a specific observation or behavior that we saw. So going back to our example of the completeness and the accuracy, the student might have missed up a couple of steps within the exam. And if we don't ask them how well they think they did, we're not going to get at a misconception or a misunderstanding or even a logical reason why they performed the way they did. So it's very important to ask the learner for their own self-assessment up front. Be specific. And so if you go back to the setting expectations, that kind of scopes what it is that you're going to give feedback on, and you can be very specific because you're going to look for, you've already negotiated what you're going to give feedback on. Identify a positive in an area for improvement. That's another category. They provided an example of how to improve. Maybe they provided them a take-home message outside of the patient room, and they negotiated a goal at some point in time with the junior learner to follow up on the next time. The last category is knowledge, application, and integration. So did the M4 highlight basic science material in a clinical context? Did they relate some part of the encounter to the M1 or M2's coursework? So one of the ways you can give feedback is using an advocacy inquiry model. And what you do with this, you focus on the observation. So I noticed that you did X. I saw that, you didn't place the stethoscope in the right place. I heard you say. Those are very observable, concrete things. You can give your point of view with, I noticed that you sat down to talk to Mrs. Jones. I like that you did that because. How do you see it? I saw that you didn't place the stethoscope in the correct placement. It concerns me because. So these are just some examples, and I was wondering what you were thinking, or I was wondering why you might have done that way. These are just a couple of examples of wordings that you can use. Another one that I use a lot is, I observed you do this. It gives the perception of, is that your intent? So sometimes I use the perception and intent a lot as a question because people don't mean to do certain things. Maybe they didn't realize they did it a certain way. So this is the advocacy inquiry model. And in summary, the first set is to set expectations, and this provides the scope for what you're going to give feedback on. Give your feedback. Invite the learner for to give their own critical reflection. Identify the gap that you saw. Investigate what they were thinking. So how do you think you did? Can you tell me why? Because that gets at the motivating factors for you to then close the gap. The student's going to create an independent learning plan for improvement, and then there's education. So the independent learning plans, there's a form that the students will turn in. It covers the strength, their perceived strengths, their perceived area of improvement, a negotiated goal that they've come up with you, a plan for achieving the goal, and how are we going to know? What is the evidence for learning that goal or for achieving that goal? Here are some resources. eMERGE has the materials that the students need, just so you know where they are. They're all posted on eMERGE. The 3rd and 4th years have had lectures on providing feedback, and those are available through eMERGE as well. And there is a Teaching Selective wiki as well that has other resources available. So the assessment for the end of the class between now and March or April when you're working with your M4s, formally observe them teaching. Meet with them. As you're observing them, complete the checklist. Meet to provide formative feedback, and have the M4 discuss their learning plan. Complete an end-of-the-course competency assessment, and submit both the checklist and the competency forms to the Department of Medical Education. If you have any questions, please contact myself or Allison Hammer. We're happy to help you. I'm happy to talk to you at any time. And thank you very much.